But yeah, so I'm going to pass over to Alex, who is live from Sydney. Off you go, Alex.
All right, amazing. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I can't see you, so I'm just gonna just shout. So I thought, what's that?
Nothing.
Cool. All right, so that's what you had me today. What I thought I'd do is create a little story called Mechanical Engineers, Microbiologists and Me, authored by myself, and is really just a bit of a, like all good stories, has a bit of a beginning, a middle and an end-ish. And I'll talk through with that my journey from industry when I started out, and maybe before then as well as a child, and how that has informed who I am as a designer today. How I got to Sydney, where I am now, it's 9 o'clock at night, so bear with me, I'm fueled on a Chobani yogurt. Yeah, and then I'll also talk a little bit about why I'm really bloody excited about branding and why I love it, and I love doing it every single day. Now, in terms of the theme of 13, well, the fortuitous thing for me, and will continue to be if I get invited back to conference weeks, is that it happens to coincide with a number of years that I graduated from UCLan. So I graduated 13 years ago, and I'll talk, as I mentioned today, about that journey from Preston to Sydney by a little bit of time in London in the process. So if we start in the beginning and talk a little bit about where I grew up, and you have to bear with me, this will be slightly biographical for a moment. I was born in Preston. We're actually in the beautiful triangle between Chorley, Leyland and Preston, in a little place called Claytonley Woods, amongst a lot of incredibly smart people, which was quite fascinating, and your clue is in the title of the story that I'm telling today. There's my dad, who was a mechanical engineer and still spends his weekends grinding and burning off his leg hairs. There was my granddad, who was an engineer as well. My brother is a chemist, my cousin's a microbiologist, and my mum was a bank manager at Halifax for a period of time. This is not my mum. I couldn't find a picture of my mum at the Halifax. This is just a lady off the website, and you can imagine. When we think about that, they're all kind of what I call left brain heroes, incredibly smart, incredibly logical, incredibly bright people. And then there's me, what I would call the man with the golden NHS spectacles, a book in its own right, yet to be written. But I started out my life a little bit differently to some. I was quite unwell as a child from about the age of 4 till I was sort of later into my teenage years. And that illness and childhood kind of made my upbringing a little bit different to most. It meant that as a person, I was totally terrified of thunderstorms. I don't know why. I was terrified of everything, maybe because of the ill health. I was permanently looking out the window, at the thunderstorms, but also just generally at distracted all the time. I was always doing 3 things badly at once, trying to multitask and doing a bad job of it, but those things were always quite creative. But I never really crafted anything. I was always hopping around in different places. But I was always fascinated by how things work. You kind of can't grow up with engineers around you without someone trying to fix something, show you something, how an engine works, how electricity circuit. And I didn't also, as part of that, really know where I fit in, because none of that stuff really resonated with me. I didn't feel particularly smart, because ultimately everyone around me was talking about things I didn't quite understand. What I've learned later, of course, is that I was smart in my own ways. So I kind of grew up in this environment where there was 2 sides to the story. There was this left side, the logic, the common sense, the process, the people that I grew up with. And then there was the brain I was born with, the right-hand side, which was creative, it was imaginative, and occasionally intuitive. And I suppose a lot of what I'll talk about today is how design has helped connect the environment I grew up in, that left side, with the brain I was born with, which is the right-hand side. And actually, in the perfect way, when those 2 elements come together, great, I believe, forms the basis of great design and great brand design, which is what I specialize in most of the time and most of the day. So the thing that I was missing though, in that space and at that time as I was growing up, was a community. You know, I did lots of little design projects along the way. I did my own little things on sort of random forums and whatnot, and Photoshop Elements and Microsoft Publisher, but I didn't really have a community that I belonged to. And I guess that's Cube, the building that you're in right now, where I consider really university for me as a really pivotal moment in my life. Much I was kind of ill and unwell for a lot of my life up until I was around 18. I didn't have that community, and I found it in this building and with these people. So I finally met a community I belonged in, full of really brilliant minds from plenty of different backgrounds. And what was really special about this, I reflect on, is that we essentially created our own pseudo studio environment. We had a dartboard on the wall, we ate our dinners and our lunches there, and we went in every single day of the week, creating things and working on things together and talking about those things. And we were there so often that we managed to even make John and Andy part of our picture, our team photo at the end of the day. In that process, and I think this resonates with me a lot today, we played a lot, we made things and we created a lot at university, things that those tools that we had in those days I really wish that I could still use to this day. It would be, every day someone would come up from somewhere down on the ground floor and go, I've just found this other room and they've got a 3D printer there and they've got a laser printer and they've got this and they've got that. And we would go and use them and we would go and try things. And I think, in reflection, those tools that we had then would still be really relevant now as we start to narrow down the tools that we use into almost exclusively digital products. We've essentially, that's not a surprise that some of the work starts to look quite similar these days because ultimately we're using the same. The example of that, when we were at uni, we had the guys, all of us tried lots of different techniques, lots of different things. You had Mark, who was creating things out of concrete, street furniture out of concrete for writers' festivals. You had Ben, who was creating a horse jockey fashion line called Gigi, and he was using a sewing machine to make the vests. Sarah was creating things with light and layers and texture, and she still does that to this day. And Ben was even, again, still creating random different things with paper and paper craft. So there was a lot going on, and because of that, and because of the tools that we were using and the way that we were creating things, we were coming up with quite different and original ideas, I think, and because of that. There was me, of course, as part of this, creating, I think what you'd argue, some work with quite interesting ideas, but quite poorly crafted at times. Even my toilet signs don't quite line up, which I don't think is a ringing endorsement of my craft in those days. But there was ideas in there and there was thinking in there. And so I think, as a summary of that, making, playing, and trying new things equals new ideas, and that's exactly what we did at uni. We were really encouraged to do that at uni by the tutors and the environment that we were around and the community that we built, and that studio environment. I suppose a project of note at uni for me was the spaghetti packaging. I was just talking to John about that. There's a few reasons why it was of note. The main thing is that ultimately it got my foot in the door in a lot of places as a student. And really, I suppose an outcome of that is that you only really need one really good thing, and that will get people talking about you and let you have a conversation with them. But it was a really good outcome of that making and playing and trying things in a group environment. We were tasked with packaging a series of different food items. You could do eggs, although you had marbles, so not food, but spaghetti was the one that I chose. And just by pressing the spaghetti in a pack on lots of different things on the desk, I realized that you could create impressions on top. And then that was how this NYC spaghetti and the skyscrapers formed on top of the pack. And it created something quite different. What I like about that as a thought, and we go back to the microbiologists and the engineers and that sort of hybrid point or crossover point between that and creativity, is that there was a bit of both in this work. There was the creative side of things to find the things that people maybe hadn't seen in spaghetti packaging before, let's say, but also it required a little bit of engineering and a little bit of structural work to make the whole thing work together. I had to work with a guy called Ben Thorpe who helped me model the skyscrapers to press into the bottom of the spaghetti. Had to work on the actual structure of the packaging to make it all hold together. And I was very lucky as well. I was working at the time. They gave me some of their free time, if you will, to help me build it and create it en masse. And just 3 examples to be able to then send to a few different awards ceremonies and so on. Somewhere along the line, Mike Rigby popped up. He was already in Australia, and he's an alumni of UFAM. They came to my graduation show and said, hey, do you fancy, do you fancy coming along to Australia for a 6-month internship? And at that point, I was in a fortunate position where I could do that. In hindsight, a little bit privileged because I was able to afford to get the flight over here and maybe a little bit of accommodation as well to help me get settled. And from that, really, the trajectory of my career and so on has a lot to thank to Mike, who gave me that opportunity. Now, the road to Australia is quite well worn from a UCLan perspective. No other than Andy started it sometime, I think, at the end of the 1990s. You were telling me this morning, I think, Andy. And he told us all of these stories of his time in Australia and how he circumnavigated the country, showed us on a map where he went. And actually, there's loads of Preston alumni here, because ultimately, I think, from him and his inspiration, but also because it's a great place to be and a good place to live. The experience of me moving over here was, to say the least, absolutely terrifying. And you can imagine that I hadn't really done a lot in my life by that point. I graduated, I got through uni, but actually in terms of life experience, it was quite limited. I can still remember the feeling of being on the plane with that sort of sick feeling in my stomach of, oh, what am I doing? Where am I going to go? I didn't know anybody here. All I had was to get from the airport to Bristol, so I was a little bit low on information. But the really exciting thing was that I landed at Interbrand, where I am today, but then that's where I started 13 years ago as well, in a business that was absolutely firing. There was 50 people working there at the time from all around the world, writers, illustrators, strategists, motion designers, and they were thriving because they just rebranded Australia's largest telco, and because of that, they're doing incredible work. And I think immediately I was able to understand the importance of being in new environments and being around new people, because all these people from different parts of the world had unique stories, they had unique backgrounds, and ultimately they became mentors and close friends even to this day that I keep in touch with. And a lot of those people have now gone on to work in other places. They don't live in Australia anymore. They might work for Apple, they might work in London for Wolf Ollins, whatever that might be. I've managed to create that network from just being around 50 really, really smart people from around the globe right at the beginning of my journey in Australia. So what were Interbrand doing at that time? Well, I'll flick through quickly. They had rebranded Australia's largest telco, which used to be government owned and was therefore showed it being quite a corporate looking brand. They brought a full world of colour to the identity in that time, a full world of colour that reflected the diverse people in Australia. So rebranded Sky New Zealand in its dynamic and colourful way. And we also, because of the permissions that the Telstra job and so on had given us, it meant that we were able to work on a bunch of arts and culture projects. I had nothing to do with any of these, by the way. This is the group of people I've just walked into with this incredible work and reputation already developed. So we're developing the Alzheimer's Australia campaign. This lady on the right is called Ita Buckrose. She actually lives in the building that I live in now. She's an amazing, and formerly the chairman of ABC, which is the Broadcast Commission in Australia. And she does live in one of the penthouses. I live lower down, but yeah, amazing woman. And I suppose the interesting thing about that time was that because I was an intern and because I was one of 50 people, I really wasn't the main character. So from a uni perspective, I was lucky that I was, we were a great year, we did great work, but I went then into that sort of, the small fish, big pond analogy, and I really wasn't the main character anymore, but at least I was in the show. And actually the work that I did at Interbrand in that time wasn't particularly exciting. In fact, I worked on essential things like mosquito spray, which you really need in Australia, packaging for that, packaging for Scotch pancakes, which we call pikelets here, and white bread, which was a big staple of my diet at the time. But I guess the point was I was around really, really smart people, and the briefs didn't really matter. I just was happy to be there and the opportunity that gave me. And by going to Interbrand, working on things with a bit of hunger and a little bit of excitement, it gave me the references and the sort of connections that then made me have a career in Australia. It set the trajectory for what was to come. The other byproduct of living in Australia by myself with no friends for a period of time, at least the first 6 months, was that I had loads and loads of time by myself. And so it allowed me to look up. whilst I was trying to keep my chin up. And I had an SLR at the time, which later evolved to an iPhone camera. And really, what I did was I took photos of things. Just everywhere I went, I took snaps of things. And some of them are good, some of them weren't good, but I like this idea of starting to capture things that maybe other people hadn't quite seen, moments of coincidence, moments of satire or irony, just capturing little things here and there that might make you smile, might make you question. And I still do that today as much as possible. So these are photos from more recent times, whether that was when I was in Italy with the perfect framing of an old man getting on a bus and the light just hitting him perfectly, or the framing in Western Australia with Mikey and Jordan, who are Preston alumni, in the fish and chip shop, to the COVID cat that I made friends with that blended always perfectly into the distinct 70s brickwork of the apartment building I was living in. And I do this a lot because I just find that it keeps me observing the world around me as much as possible. I think it's really easy to just have your phone in your hand and look down and walk, and I do that too, don't get me wrong. But by actually looking at things slightly differently, it really opens your eyes to different moments of coincidence. Like, for instance, this guy in Paris who happened to be wearing the same coloured shirt as the bin liners that were in front of him, or the wheelie bins in front of the mural that all match the colours. But then even street art on top of it. Didn't really ever meant to have street art on top of it. I think there's out there in the world if you just observe them, and there's really opportunities in everything if you look hard enough. And I think that's a really great sentiment for design and being a good designer and being open at an earlier part of your career, is just being open to doing lots of different things and away. You need to work with brave clients and supportive people that want to do good work and want to push those opportunities. And I thought a good example of that was my own version of a telco, or one that I worked on at the agency I left, Interbrand, for, called RE. They've been challenged, this is about maybe 9 years ago now, they've been challenged in Australia's second largest telco. And ultimately, on paper, maybe not the most exciting opportunity, but we were really excited about it because the client was brave, and they said, well, actually, we want to make Optus the most loved telco in Australia. If Telstra is the biggest telco, we want to be the most loved. And so we said yes, and we had a lot of help with this character. This was the base of the brand identity that we created for Optus. They kind of put the sort of physical embodiment of this customer service and most loved brand that they wanted to be. We called him Ollie. And he became this incredible little mascot and character that stretched across the whole world of Optus, from the digital world to the physical world and everything that was in between. And then we created a design language and distinctive assets, which I'll talk about a bit more later on in the presentation, like a hand-drawn font, which was drawn by people because we wanted it to be a loved brand and loved by people. Ollie was created by, drawn by an illustrator called Marco Palmieri, who we still work with today on different projects, and he had heaps of different poses and to reflect the different feelings of Australians as they interacted with the Optus brand. And we even got to do some wonderful copywriting. I was able to, a lot of the Optus work in those times was written by sort of by myself, but lots of other people, of course, and was able to lean into the kind of the wit that maybe I had and other people had in the studio. So it was a really great opportunity to start to show what I could offer, even in small capacities with a much more senior team. There's a little bit of an example of how we went about making the hand-drawn font, from literally painting it with ink to then vectoring it up and then getting a typographer to make it into a working font. But the reason I wanted to talk about Optus was that because it was such a big business and I worked on it for so long, I used to get all these little briefs all the time. And there was opportunities in all of them if you wanted there to be. And again, I was backed by very smart creative directors that went, hey, there's an opportunity, let's push it, keep going, keep going. And it meant that when push it and put great language in there, make it tell an amazing story. It meant that when we did packaging, we were able to have copywriting in there, each pack having a different line that reflected the perk or the proof point of the product. Even down to little T's and C's on the side of the pack that said, the pub quiz champ to be used for research purposes only, of course. And then we got to do things like sim packaging, and then later developed into more sim packaging, where we got to do pop-up sim packaging, where you open the back and there's these rolling hills that Ollie was living amongst. So, there was a lot of bravery in the business at that time, but each one was an opportunity. And I think that was a good learning for me, was that, while I did get kinds, this was really where I got to learn a lot about the power of brand. The bag's very Preston, I think, and even the USB less Preston, but even that was cute, except you had to pull the USB out of its arse, Ollie's arse, which probably wasn't the best product design in the end. And I guess sort of to summarize that, Optus was really that sort of moment where I started to immerse myself into the world of branding, finding something that I truly loved and could see the clear benefit of the scale of it, the impact of it. And really understanding now that branding was sitting right in the middle is the scientists and the creatives, that sweet spot. So if you consider that sort of the middle of my talk, or the middle of my story, let's sort of speed through now a little bit to where I am today and what I'm doing today. Well, in my opinion, brands are more important than ever. But as the world has changed dramatically, their role with it. Once upon a time, brands were a bit like this. They had a logo, they had a color palette, they had really strong, distinctive assets, but they were quite static in what they had to do, and they didn't have to do lots of different things. They might have to live on packaging, they might have to live on advertising, they might have to live on a little bit of stationery. But now brands have changed, and they actually need to be these living, breathing ecosystems with this ability to now reflect culture, weave into a rapidly changing society, and virtual realm as well. So brands need that distinctive asset, that foundation, that thing that lives in the middle, but they need much more room to play and much more room to be flexible. And of course, Coke is a really good example of this, although it has very, very distinctive assets that are 100 years old. It's had to adapt itself to use those assets to reflect and stretch into different places as its brand and its channels and its audience has grown too. And so when we talk about branding a little bit more, successful businesses put brand right at the center of their business, and they allow it to purposefully guide the way the business walks, the way it talks, it dresses, the way we interact with it, and the experiences that we have with it, not unlike people, everyday people. So the opportunity with branding is awesome because it sits right at the center, or it should sit right at the center of a business. You actually get loads of opportunities as a designer to work on different disciplines. You get to be a visual identity designer, which is kind of the bread and butter, but you also get to write headlines, and you get to do packaging and digital design, experience design, animation, illustration. You get the idea. There's lots of different components to a business, and the brand needs to be able to be sort of adapted and enhanced for those different areas of the business as and when needed. And so actually, the role of a designer or a brand designer now, and more so than ever, is they need that diverse range of skill sets to be able to adapt to those different disciplines as and when needed. And ultimately, businesses that live out their brand authentically over time start to create loyal, lasting relationships with customers. So when we think about brands today, a lot of the products that those brands are attached to are actually quite similar, right? If you look at Nike, you look at Adidas, you look at New Balance as an example, they're pretty similar products, but the brand is the thing that you connect with. That's the thing that you create loyalty with. And so I thought I would go on a little bit of an experiment, bear with me, to demonstrate this. I hopped into Midjourney and asked it a little question. Now, for those that are familiar with how AI works, in its simplest form, AI to work needs data, right? And generative AI tools like Midjourney learn from millions of data points, images on the internet, to predict content that you requested. Over time, the data should reflect this. So I asked it this question. Could you imagine the room of a hotel designed by Microsoft? And it gave me this. It spat out hotel rooms, of course, but lots of different kinds of hotel rooms. They all have beds, tick, they had lights, that's useful. They had wall decorations and windows, and to be honest, I would love to stay in all of them. They look amazing. But each one is very different, and each one is a unique world. Now, you might argue that Microsoft, the reason for that is that Microsoft has a wide range of products, and we use them in different ways around the world, and it reflects that. But you might also argue that Microsoft struggles to sort of understand exactly its consistency of what it is as a brand in this sort of design sense, I suppose. So if you looked at those as a hotel room, you wouldn't necessarily know which brand it was associated with. You would just know it was like a sick hotel room, but who's made it, who's it designed for and by. So naturally, then asked the follow-up question, and I said, well, the room of a hotel designed by Apple, please. And he gave me this. Each a hotel room, each with a bed, each with lights and a window still, tick, tick, tick. Or some have couches, but you get the idea. The windows, they look like screens, they look like devices, as does the furniture. It's rounded, it feels like the things that we hold in our hands every day of Apple products. But also what is interesting is that there's space, right? It's easy to access, everything's easy to walk around, it's light, it's bright in its own way. And you can even imagine the fact that Siri would be there by your bedside, ready to take your room service order. So when you look at the Apple brand, you can see that it is, in its own right, through its long-term consistency, world that becomes very familiar, that we can all recognize, and very iconic in its own right. Now, that is not a very good science experiment, and my brother would be ashamed of me. And let's be honest, Microsoft is an incredibly successful company for a myriad of reasons. But brands like Apple that live and breathe design and put brand at the center of their business are exceptional at maintaining their sense of self and purpose. And they let that shine through in every single part of the brand, from the offices that they've built, to their stores, to the watches that we have on our wrists. So with that in mind, I thought maybe I would talk a little bit about how we build distinctive living brands at Interbrand now. So about 6 years ago, I came back to Interbrand. It's officially called a boomerang in Australia, which is funny, and where you start at one place, you go away and you come back. You get the idea. Let's talk about what we do now and how we build brands in our way. And the most important thing is you need a team to do that. And this is the Interbrand team. This is us at our Christmas party, which I'm still recovering from. And we're made up of a really wonderful interdisciplinary team of people made up of writers, so storytellers, strategists, and designers. And we all collaborate every single day to create a brand in the middle. I talked about brands sitting in the middle of businesses and being able to touch lots of different parts of that business. Well, you need a group of people with different disciplines to get there. The strategists, they lay the foundation, they lay the framework, and define the purpose and that sense of self for a business that's authentic to them. The writers tell the stories, but also determine the voice of the brand. And then the designers come in and look at the look and feel. We create the distinctive assets that I talked about, but then also how the brand can act and show up in the real world. So in the time that I've been away from Interbrand and then come back, we've done a heap of different work, of different varieties. About 8 years ago, we rebranded the Sydney Opera House, arguably the most iconic building in Australia. We rebranded supermarkets. We work with McDonald's most days of the week. We work with healthcare brands and even arts and culture brands like Fed Square, like Welltels, which I'll talk through in a minute. And ultimately, our mission as an organization is to give clients the confidence to make iconic moves. And we do that through the people that we talk to, the people that we tell stories with and build and play on their imagination. And we do that through interactions, how the brand shows up. And then we also do that by helping clients from an organizational level, getting right into the business to support them and giving them their confidence to sort of then go and make those iconic moves. And at the heart, pretty simple, and there's a lot of methodology around it, and you'll hear that a lot as you get into branding and whatever worlds, that everyone's got a different way of talking about things, but ultimately what we do is simple. We help brands know where to go next. We then show them how to get there, and then we actually make it happen. So we set the framework, we show them the vision, and then we actually are there all the way along to bring it to life in all the myriad of different forms, just like we did at Optus as well back in the day. And so what I thought I'd do is I'd sort of talk to you a little bit about 3 key things that I think are really useful and valuable and almost essential really in building a brand. And also link those 3 things that I'll talk about with 3 projects that we've done at Interbrand in the last couple of years that are really, I guess, I'm passionate about and also have become really defining of my time here at Interbrand as well and the work that the amazing guys here do every day. So the first is research and community builds authenticity. So representation is really, really important, more and more in branding. There are a myriad of reasons that you can understand. If you're ever creating a brand for a community or that people will engage with, a faith or whatever it might be, culture, art, then you need to understand everything that the people that work there or engage with the brand do and what they believe in. And equally, you need to understand the business and the practices of that business as much as possible too. So authenticity is essential. It needs to resonate with people when the brand is launched. And we worked with the Sydney Fish Market. I thought this would be a good example of a brand that we had to do heaps of research on to understand and make the brand authentic to that organisation. So Sydney Fish Market, anyone's been to Sydney, you might have been to the fish market. It's, I think, a 70s or 60s built building, and it needed a refresh. And the New South Wales government have invested something like $700 million in the development of a brand new fish market, which will be the largest investment in the harbour since the Opera House. Now, the fish market is quite a unique business because it is made up of a really diverse range of people that work in it. You've got chefs, you've got educators, you've got schools, you've got fishermen, you've got people that work in the stores and it's really a broad range of people, and the employees that actually, the marketing teams and so on, for the really sit and listen and learn about everything that they were passionate about. Some of the fishermen that have worked at the fish market have been there for generations since their families came over from Italy and Greece, which happened in the sort of 50s and 60s in Australia. They've been fishermen here. And to do that, we went on excursions, and we went on multiple excursions. We went to everything to do, we went to the Sea Life Centre, or SeaWorld here in Sydney, to look at how fish swim and how the water reflects and refracts through there at 5 a.m. in the morning to the fish market to look at the auctions and learn about different species of fish that are found in Australia and caught in Australia. We did at-home cooking classes where we cooked blue swimmer crab, and we also ate some fish and chips at the actual market itself, which I can only describe as a seagull gourmet. It is intense. And then we took all that research and we brought it home back to the office, and we actually started to go into even more research, not just linked specifically to the fish market, but to actually the ocean and the world of water. We looked at how the tide changes through the moon. We looked at First Nations fish traps that were built, 30,000, 40,000 years ago to catch fish in sustainable ways. We looked at interactive experience moments, activations in museums and so on. And those things created the bedrock then of the concepts that we created for the fish market, which I'll share with you. Each one linked authentically to some of the research that we found. So one of the first concepts was leveraging this crossover between old and new, how the barnacles sort of catch on, or how things rust over time as the tide wears them away. We looked at old type, we looked at the old practices of the auctions, and then we looked at the modern interpretation of that. You'll see the thumbnail there, that's what the new building is going to look like. It's this wonderful wavy roof that is the signature of the building and will informs a lot of the design decisions we made in the end. So we looked at the old and new and what that might mean. That was a concept, something authentic that, especially for the fishermen, we wanted to make sure that their heritage wasn't lost, that sort of resonated. We also looked, because of that, activation ideas, like could we turn fishing nets into, upcycle them from old to new by turning fishing nets into staff uniforms or jackets, or the blue bins the fish are sold into Wellington boots. You get the idea. We also looked at ideas like how deep the depths of the ocean, when you get the parent, the building itself has 4 levels to it. The lowest level is where all the weird and wonderful fish are sold at auction, and the top is where the bars are and the restaurants will be. So we thought there was a really nice analogy between those 2 sort of extremes and the stages that it takes to go deeper into the ocean and how the brand could adapt. And then we also looked in a more contemporary way at the ebb and flow of the new building, the rooftop and how that reflects the ebb and flow of the ocean, but also the ebb and flow of the people that come in and out of the space. It's very, very busy at 4 a.m, it's very quiet at 10 a.m, and then it's really busy again in the afternoon and lunchtime and so on. So we thought that was really interesting. And that concept, as a mixture, we didn't go specifically with exactly one concept, but this one was inspired the most with the final brand identity, which absolutely is born in there to celebrate the new roof line of the building and the architecture of the building, but then creates this really distinctive asset, but flexible asset that can then house all of the content and all the things that you can do in the market underneath it. And that kind of is a good example, I think, of the distinctive assets that we talked about, but then also this sort of flexibility and play that a brand needs to express itself to different people at different times. Those distinctive assets then are great because they work in merch, they work on, you know, frying pans, and they work in lots of different places. And then we extended the toolkit and the assets into illustration and photography. So there's a lot that happened with the fish market, but a lot of it started with good research, good community engagement, and good representation to allow us to go and build the brand that we did. The second point is storytelling builds an emotional connection. And I thought example of this. What is it? Well, Whale Tales was an art trail exhibited around Sydney Harbour, made up of whale tails, and the stories from each of the artists that painted them. So there was about 50 of these things plotted around the western side of the Sydney Harbour. And the reason for this was really important because when we think about Sydney and the harbour, people just think about the Opera House and the bridge. There's actually loads to it. There's hundreds of kilometres of harbour side to explore. And this western side, where the red line is the bit that's kind of a little bit disjointed, different developments over time that don't really talk to each other. And we were basically enabled or commissioned by the company that were in charge of connecting those different precincts together to create this art trail, which we, of course, were given the name of Whale Tales. So the storytelling component, really interesting, stories being a key component, with it being the stories of the tales and the tales and the tales. And so something incredible has breached the surface of New Sydney waterfront, a whole pot of creativity, culture and community, a story sculpted from the sea, standing tall by the shore for you to see and explore for yourself. Migrate your way along the water and discover 30 tales telling 30 tales, celebrating our city, our history, our uniquely natural wonders. These are stories that could only be told here, and now it's time to uncover your own. So through amazing writers that we have and great storytelling, we encapsulated that feeling of what the event was about, and that then allowed us to extend out into a really wonderful, rich brand identity system and logo. The logo was a really key component. We were very fortunate that we were given the name Whale Tales, so you can only imagine that we very quickly were like, well, there's something in stories and whales, how do we meld those two things together? That took time. We had to craft things, we sketched things, we tried things. How do we make this work? Our first iteration wasn't right, and our 12th, 20th iteration didn't feel quite right either. Eventually we got there, we created something that felt quite iconic, like a publication logo in its own right, in the same way, you know, Penguin Books, for instance, would be. Design language that really celebrated that tension between whales and the scale of whales, the big, bold systems and bold typography that go alongside that, but then partner with that tension of storytelling and the editorial component, the sans serif typeface, the delicacy of that. And those two things, tension is a great tool in design, as I've talked about from even the photography things that I've been taking, but in good design, that tension makes a big difference. And you can see that start to come to life through the brand, how we would hero the different artists that were creating the tales, mirroring and borrowing from maybe those posters you saw for the fish market, where, you know, if you go fishing here, I think it's probably the same in the UK, you get these wonderful posters that show you all the different sizes of fish and how many you're allowed to catch at one time. Well, we thought, well, why don't we do that for the website as well, so that people could, when they were able to auction and buy the whale tails for charity, I didn't mention that, it looks a little bit similar. Into publishing, you know, wayfinding, where the language still played a role, the story begins here. And then, you know, even into how do we engage with children, how do we get other people and families involved in this? And the idea was you scan a QR code on the base of the sculpture, that would tell you a story, and there'd be rewards and games and all sorts of different things that people could do to engage with it. So that was Whale Tales, and the importance of storytelling, which was woven through in lots of different ways, and the importance of language. I do think designers, even if you don't feel comfortable with it, can write. People can write if they try, and I tend to work when I've got new briefs on the table. I will go away and I'll just write loads and loads of stuff. It might not be very good, it might be very long and waffly, but it's a really good way to sort of get you thinking about how you're going to play back the story and the idea of your identity to the client or whomever might be for it. And then the last point I wanted to talk about was the impact that design can have and how it can be to the betterment of lives. I told my story earlier about being unwell as a child. The other story I didn't tell is that I grew up with a lot of nurses. My grandma was a nurse, my auntie was a nurse. A lot of people around me, even the scientists and the engineers, are all about creating things that make the world a better place. And I think design is absolutely one of those elements and one of those things that can do that. So the last project I'll show before I round out is the rebrand that we did of the Royal Institute of Deaf and Blind Children, RIDBC. Now RIDBC, the brand was no longer what it said it was anymore. It had grown as an organisation to make lots of different acquisitions of cochlear implant companies and different age groups and so on. So it was no longer royal, it was no longer an institute, and it was no longer for children. And so we had to make a big shift to take all of their different brands that they'd acquired over time, meld them together, and create one brand called Next Sense. Was reflecting the senses, and the brand was built around this idea of the ability for it to be many things to many people. Every single part of the brand was designed to be accessible and to be barrier-free and to be used as a tool for change within the organisation. It meant that the brand had speech, it had typography, a custom typeface that I'll talk through in a minute. It had braille or dots that were inspired by braille, an abstraction of that. And it had sound waves to reflect the hearing component. And then it also had pictograms and illustrations that spoke to sight and seeing things, all of which spoke to sort of broader language of kit parts that spoke to the language of the senses. The most amazing thing about this was the brand was able to adapt itself to different people at different times. I don't know how well that will show, but we even got the logo eventually translated into an Auslan, so Australian Sign Language, to be able to be shared with people that use sign language as their sort of primary language day to day. So the brand lived in and amongst the people's lives and the organisation. This is how it started to come to life, all of those different components working as a sort of harmonious kit of parts. And you kind of get a good sense of how it starts to work. The brand, as I mentioned, was accessible and barrier-free. That meant that it was AAA compliant. Every colour would work with black and was the most contrast you can possibly get in colours. It was sound enabled. We built sonic. People that maybe couldn't see could hear the brand. It was deliberately bold and graphic. The physical environment was tactile and textured, and there was always this sort of component of high contrast in everything that we did. As I mentioned, we built a typeface which was called Next Sans, and that was by a type foundry called Family Type, who actually, a good example of that, I used to work with a guy called Britton, who owns Family Type. When I first came to Interbrand, he was the guy that was New Zealand on the list. And now he's won multiple black pencils for his typography work in the last few years. He created and adapted a font that he created to make it more accessible, by making letters more distinctive. Even the hello, the L's and the hello are a little bit curved, so you can distinguish them from a lowercase L to an uppercase I. All that sort of stuff was considered. We even did a photo shoot with a bunch of different children over 4 years. This girl here was happy to tell me that I was bald very loudly on set one time, which was okay and true. But we created this wonderful, dynamic photography style that felt like it was in high resolution, like it felt like it was enhanced, just like the brand was designed to do. Pictograms that moved, and then how that extended into this really broad range of editorial landscapes and so on. We coded things. I'm conscious of time, so I'm being faster than I want to be, but we coded a piece of art where one of the ladies, called Lindy, she had a cochlear implant, but was an amazing pianist. So we asked her to play some music, and we coded the visuals on the right-hand side to match the music live as she performed it. And you can see these little dots and the waves playing a role. But it became this really wonderful identity that lived within the organization. And the most exciting thing for me when I talk about the power of brands and when brands are boldly allowed to live at the center of business is they can inform everything. And in NextSense's case, they're about to build a purpose-built center of excellence, which will be the best in class in the Southern Hemisphere. And the brand is weaving its way through that building. There's going to be curved furniture, there's going to be dots, there's going to be concrete with pressed waves in it. The whole brand is living in that space and will be interacted with on a really tactile experience level. So, study on a page how we've enhanced it, but this is how the brand lives people's lives, and I love this page because it shows the impact of the work that I think design can do and the work that we do here. In that it was able to become school uniforms. We're able to go do photo shoots. The kids love it. They love interacting with it. We're able to go and show the kids what we were doing, the briefs, the photo shoots. We went on tours of the new building where you see the logo on hard hats and helmets and on signage. It's so expansive now and loved by the business that it's certainly my passion project in the last few years, and a real privilege to have worked with them on it, with of course a very, very talented team of people in. Come on the journey with us. So that's the end of my story. And I guess to summarize, the mechanical engineers, the microbiologists, and me, well, I actually think that design, maybe once when I was younger, I didn't really, think that what I was going to be able to live up, close to these different professions. Well, I actually think design is absolutely able to live in those spaces. I see design just as integral, as important, sometimes more important, and the gap is closer than ever before. And I think that the opportunities that we have with our skills are endless, and the world needs them. So that's my talk. I thank you very much. And there is me again as a school kid with my NHS classes. Thank you.
Healthy applause. Healthy applause. Should we do? Have we got time for any questions, Alex? Or are you ready to wrap? Yeah.
No, up to you guys. I know you've got a packed schedule, so whatever's good.
Any questions in the room?
We know you've got to get to bed.
It is bedtime.
I do. The yogurt's wearing off.
Yeah.
I see a hand.
I've noticed that you use AI. Does your franchise often use AI? Or was that?
Did you just what was that? Do the brand agencies use AI? Did you say?
Yeah. Yes.
Could you just repeat? Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think it's we're starting to. I think it's going to become in the same way we use other tools like Adobe, Figma, whatever that might be. I think AI is going to be one of those tools that we need to harness. I think there's a role we have to work out more how we use it ethically. Certainly from our business's perspective, it's a great way for us to visualize ideas quickly, whereas maybe prior we might have had to Photoshop something together. Now we can quickly put in a prompt and bring it to life. But it's not in terms of using it for commercial benefit, we have to be careful with that, because it's, as you know, that are not licensed things to work with. But yeah, we are using it more. It's a good way to visualize things quickly, and I think it's only going to become more of a tool in the future.
You mentioned you can use like branding to span across all these different art forms like packaging, web design, and animation and stuff like that. So does Interbrand include people that do all of that, or do you bring in freelancers or people from other companies to do that part of it?
I'll just repeat that, Alex.
Yes.
Oh, did you hear it?
I heard it. It's a good question. So I was telling John before, we're a team of 5 people, a design team of 5 people. Is that right? Yes. And I think that was useless actually, in terms of all those things. But they're, as a team, individuals, they've all got quite diverse skill sets. But there's one of our design directors is a great web designer, a great digital designer. Our other design director is a great motion designer, directing motion. So I think you need to be a good brand designer, you probably need to have a few skills, be, deep in that. But what we need to get, do things that are specialist, like we need to go build a whole website, or we need to go build a range of packaging, then we absolutely bring in people that can support us with that. So I like to think we sort of set a lot of the thinking and the concepts and things, but then generally when it comes to execution, we need support because we're only a small team. So yeah, it's a bit of a pretty lean team in the middle, and then it expands out as and when required.
Thank you.
No worries.
Any more? Okay, I think we'll let you get to bed.
Lovely. I'm going to drive myself home. Well, have a lovely day and enjoy the rest of the scheduling.
Brilliant.
Cheers,
Thanks
Alex.
so much.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Alex.
Alex.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.